Welcome, 8th graders. I am absolutely thrilled to have you here today. Okay, let's dive into this explainer and explore the fascinating world of the United States economy before the year 1877. We're going to look closely at how this country was built from the ground up. Not just through politics or battles, but through the everyday work, resources, and geography that literally shaped the lives of millions of people. Before we get into the nitty-gritty details, I want you to really think about this for a second. How do geography and resources shape a nation's destiny? Just imagine for a moment that the very ground you're standing on, the weather outside your window, and the natural resources buried deep in your soil completely dictate what your future will look like. It dictates your job, your community, even your political beliefs. Well, that is exactly what happened in early America. So here's our roadmap for today. We'll be covering America's three economic engines, inside North, South, and West, the web of trade, when priorities clash, the call for stewardship, and finally, education, morality, and peace. All right, let's kick things off with part one, America's three economic engines. It is so crucial to understand that early America wasn't just one big unified machine. In fact, before 1877, the United States was actually made up of three highly distinct regional economies, the North, the South, and the West. Because the geography and climate in these three areas were vastly different, right? So they each developed totally different industries, they relied on different resources, and as a result, they faced entirely unique sets of challenges. And these differences weren't just about what jobs people had. They fundamentally influenced culture and politics for generations. Moving right along to part two, inside North, South, and West. Let's zoom in a bit. We'll start up in the North, which had become an absolute industrial powerhouse by the mid-1800s. If you were standing in the North at this time, you'd hear the constant, deafening hum of manufacturing, shipping, and finance. You'd see towering factories mass-producing textiles at speeds nobody had ever seen before. Massive hubs of trade like New York and Boston, they were growing at an unprecedented rate. And to fuel this rapid explosion in growth, the North relied heavily on the diverse immigrant labor pouring into these cities. But of course, this urban expansion wasn't without its growing pains. It led directly to severe crowding and some really intense labor disputes among the workers. Meanwhile, the South operated on a completely different model. It was a massive agricultural economy dominated by cash crops. We are talking about vast plantations dedicated to growing cotton, rice, tobacco, and sugarcane. And the wealth down there was highly concentrated in the hands of plantation owners. But to achieve this staggering level of agricultural production, the Southern economy was built entirely upon a system of enslaved labor. Because the specific agricultural model was deeply entrenched and incredibly profitable for those at the top, the South was highly resistant to the kind of industrial change that was sweeping through the North. Finally, let's look out to the West, which was the rapidly expanding frontier economy. This was a developing region defined by small farms, folks farming grains, and massive cattle ranching operations. It was also a huge hub for resource extraction through mining. But because the West was so geographically vast and spread out, its economic growth was entirely dependent on brand new transportation networks. Literally, for the West to survive and thrive, the construction of canals and thousands of miles of railroads was absolutely vital to connect them back to the rest of the country. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is when we place these three economic models side by side, the stark differences just jump right out at you. You've got the North with manufacturing and urban immigrant labor, the South with agriculture, cash crops, and enslaved labor on plantations, and the West totally focused on farming, mining, and frontier settlement. These are three completely different ways of life, all operating within the exact same country. That brings us to part three, the web of trade. Despite their deep differences, these regions were actually incredibly connected. Think of these three vastly different regions as interlocking gears in a single national machine. They depended on one another for survival. So let's walk through exactly how this worked step by step. Step 1. Southern cotton is harvested in massive quantities. Step 2. That raw cotton doesn't just sit there, right? It's shipped directly up the coast to northern factories, and those factories spin the cotton into textiles. Step 3, the northern factories take those manufactured goods, along with tools and machinery, and sell them right back down to the South and out to the West. The regions were highly specialized, and they really needed each other. And let's not forget the final gear in our machine, the West. All of those growing, crowded, immigrant-filled urban markets in the northern cities, well, they needed to eat. It was the Western small farms and cattle ranchers who provided the massive amounts of food required to supply the North. The entire nation was this incredible, interlocking web of trade. Which leads us right into part 4, when priorities clash. While these economic gears turned together perfectly fine for a time, they eventually began to jam. So the crucial point is that these opposing labor systems and economic priorities created massive political friction. On one side, you have the North, pushing hard for rapid industrialization and urban expansion. On the exact opposite side, you have the South, totally entrenched in agricultural tradition, reliant on enslaved labor and actively resisting industrial change. As they competed for political power and influence over the growing nation, this deep economic and cultural divide ultimately led to the intense debates that sparked the Civil War. Now, let's shift gears a bit for part 5, the call for stewardship. As we evaluate these different economic systems, we really have to look beyond just the historical facts. Proverbs 21:5 tells us, "The plans of the diligent lead to profit as surely as haste leads to poverty." From a biblical morality perspective, this verse teaches us that true prosperity doesn't come from taking shortcuts. It requires wise planning, patience, and diligent hard work. Let's break down exactly what this biblical perspective means for the economies we just studied. The North, South, and West made vastly different choices based on their geography. But true economic growth, the kind that lasts and actually honors God, must be guided by diligence and fairness. It's got to be driven by personal responsibility and built entirely on honest work. And most importantly, it requires the wise stewardship of resources. True prosperity must always unequivocally reject exploitation and injustice. Economic success in any region should never, ever come at the cost of harming or exploiting others. And finally, part 6, education, morality, and peace. At HeroesMart Academy, we intertwine biblical morality with education because, simply put, education without morality will hurt. I really want you to ask yourself, what is the point of being incredibly smart, knowing all the history, and being supposedly educated if you just continue to make bad choices that hurt yourself and the people around you? Knowledge alone isn't enough, guys. It has to be paired with character. And this brilliantly illustrates an idea captured perfectly in Romans 8:6-7, which promises peace of mind to everyone who keeps their mind spiritual. This is our experience, and it's the experience of people who engage deeply with this content. When you engage with spiritual morality, it brings a lasting peace of mind that goes far, far beyond any simple economic wealth or historical knowledge. So, as we wrap up today's lesson, I want to leave you with a powerful thought to reflect on. How can communities pursue economic success while still honoring God and treating others fairly? I challenge you to take the historical lessons of the North, South, and West and the moral lessons of biblical stewardship and apply them to the real world today. Thank you so much for joining me in this explainer, students. Keep learning, keep growing, and I'll see you next time.